What happens when America's favorite game show host walks straight into the lion's den of daytime television and finds himself face to face with one of the most controversial co-hosts on TV? What you're about to witness is the moment Steve Harvey's appearance on The View. What starts as a friendly chat quickly turns into a televised showdown that nobody saw coming. In the space of seconds, the entire atmosphere shifts from lighthearted banter to full-blown confrontation. What unfolded next wasn't just an interview. It was a verbal brawl broadcast live to millions. Producers panicked behind the scenes, audience members sat frozen in disbelief, and one of the most recognizable figures in American comedy decided he'd had enough. Steve Harvey's appearance on The View would go down as the moment daytime TV crossed a line and turned into the most explosive, unforgettable clash of the year. The lights hit the stage, and Steve Harvey walked out like he owned the place. The man had that easy confidence, that kind of charm that fills a room before he even says a word. The audience clapped, cheering louder than usual for a daytime show, and Steve gave them that signature grin. He shook a few hands, cracked a joke on his way to the chair, and thanked Whoopi for having him. But the second he sat down, something felt off. Across from him, Joy Behar gave a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was polite, but stiff. She leaned back in her chair, one arm crossed, studying him the way a teacher watches a student. Steve noticed it, but brushed it off. They started with small talk, Whoopi asking about his schedule, his tour, his book. Steve told a story about filming Family Feud, made a joke about people freezing under pressure, and the audience laughed like clockwork. Everything felt smooth again. But then Joy slipped in a quick comment. "You know, Steve, you've made a living telling women how to understand men," she said with a faint grin. "That's brave of you." The audience chuckled softly. Just a passing joke. Steve caught the tone instantly. That wasn't a compliment, that was a test. He looked at her, still smiling, but his eyes had narrowed just a bit. "Well, Joy," he said lightly, "I figure somebody's got to tell the truth." The crowd laughed again, but Joy didn't. She just kept that small, tight smile and tilted her head like she was waiting for him to slip. The laughter was still echoing when Joy suddenly cut through it like a blade. "You've been married 3 times, right? So tell us, at what point did you become the expert?" Her tone was half smile, half challenge. Steve leaned back in his chair, chuckling to buy himself a second. But his eyes told a different story, narrowed, focused, ready. "Probably right after the 3rd, Joy," he said, flashing that practiced grin. "That's called learning the hard way." The crowd gave a small laugh, but Joy didn't. She leaned in, voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "Or repeating the same mistakes and selling them as wisdom." Steve's smile faded just slightly. He straightened in his chair, looking her dead in the eye. "Or maybe," he said slowly, "it's realizing mistakes don't define you. How you fix them does." Joy tilted her head, pretending to be amused, but her eyes said she'd heard it loud and clear. The mood in the studio shifted. The playful interview was gone. Whoopi glanced sideways, her hand hovering over the table as if she might step in. Steve stayed still, his posture perfect, his tone calm. But the spark was there now. Joy didn't waste a second. She leaned in, voice steady but sharp enough to slice through the air. "You profit off telling people how to love when your own life's a mess." The laughter that had filled the room seconds earlier vanished. Steve blinked once, processing, then let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "You ever think maybe folks need advice from someone who's actually lived through it?" he asked, his tone calm but his posture tightening. The audience could feel the tension shift. The easygoing Family Feud host was still smiling, but that smile no longer reached his eyes. Joy crossed her legs and gave him a sly grin. "You mean Survived your own bad decisions? She said, her voice light, but meant to sting. Steve didn't laugh this time. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table, his voice smooth, but laced with warning. You call them bad decisions. I call them lessons. But I see you're more interested in judgment than learning. His tone was measured, but it carried a quiet threat that made even Whoopi glance over, unsure if she should step in. Joy's smirk faltered for a second, but she covered it with a chuckle. Oh, I'm just curious, she said. It's not every day someone makes a fortune preaching what they can't practice. Steve's eyes narrowed. The warmth was gone. He looked at her like a man who'd been insulted before, and learned how to fight back without raising his voice. See, Joy, he said, lowering his tone, you call that a contradiction. I call it experience. People don't need perfect examples, they need real ones. His words landed heavy, and for a second, the room felt small, the cameras closer, the air thicker. Joy folded her arms, that fake smile gone for good now. The temperature in the studio seemed to drop 10 degrees. What started as a friendly interview had become something else entirely, a duel of words where each line cut deeper than the last. Steve shifted in his seat, forcing a smile that didn't quite land. Let's talk about the book, he began, his tone smooth, but a little too quick, the way people sound when they're trying to change the subject. But before the words could settle, Joy cut in, her voice sharp and deliberate. Let's talk about the real you, Steve, not the version your PR team sells. The crowd reacted immediately, half gasps, half uneasy laughter. Even Whoopi blinked like she hadn't seen that one coming. Steve froze for a beat, his face tightening just slightly, the warmth draining from his eyes. You really want to go there? He asked, his voice low, steady, but with an edge that said he was done pretending this was a friendly chat. Joy leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her grin slow and mocking. Oh, I'm already there. The words landed like a challenge. Steve's entire posture changed. His shoulders squared. His smile disappeared. You know, Joy, there's a difference between being curious and being cruel. You might want to learn it. His tone was cold now, deliberate, every syllable measured. The audience went silent, the tension thick enough to feel. Joy didn't miss a beat. And there's a difference between confidence and arrogance, she fired back, eyes locked on him. You might want to learn that too. Her voice had that sharp rhythm of someone who knew how to turn a jab into a performance. Steve sat still for a second, studying her the way a boxer sizes up an opponent after the first hit. His expression was calm, but his fingers tapped the desk like a man holding back more than he wanted to say. You see, that's your problem, he said quietly. You think honesty's arrogance because you're not used to hearing truth without sugar on it. Joy tilted her head, smirking again. No, Steve, I just don't buy it when a man sells the truth by the pound. Her tone was light, but her words weren't. Steve's laugh came out short, bitter, the kind you let slip when you finally had enough. The atmosphere had shifted completely now. The polite smiles were gone. Every word between them now carried the weight of something personal, something raw. Steve leaned forward, the tension written all over his face now. His patience, the charm, the practiced calm. It was gone. You call this journalism? He said, voice low but cutting through the silence like a blade. This isn't journalism, Joy. This is a hit job with a laugh track. The audience shifted, some gasping, others sitting dead still. Joy's smile tightened, the corners of her mouth trembling just slightly before she fired back. It's called accountability, Steve. Something you talk about, but never take. Her tone was mocking, but underneath it there was a tremor, just enough to show she knew he wasn't playing anymore. Steve leaned in, elbows on the table, his voice a slow burn. Lady, I've taken accountability in ways you wouldn't survive. It wasn't a shout. It was quieter than that, but somehow 10 times more dangerous. His eyes locked on hers, steady, unblinking. The room went cold. Joy scoffed, but her laugh came out shaky. "Oh, please," she said, waving her hand like she was brushing off a fly. "Spare me the sermon. You're just another man selling self-help to women you barely understand." Steve's expression didn't change, but his voice did. It went razor sharp, every word measured, controlled, lethal. "And you're just another critic mistaking bitterness for bravery." The words hit the air like a slap. Joy's smile vanished instantly. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She froze, eyes wide, a flush rising up her neck. That one word, bitterness, hung between them like smoke. Joy's voice dropped to a near whisper, but it carried more threat than a scream. "Did you just call me bitter?" she said slowly, her jaw tight, every word trembling with anger. Steve didn't hesitate. "If the shoe fits," he said, calm and unshaken, his tone almost casual, which somehow made it worse. The audience reacted instantly. Gasps, murmurs. Someone in the back even said, "Oh, no, he didn't." Joy's eyes widened in disbelief. "You think you can come here?" she said, her voice rising now. "Preach about respect and talk down to women like you're some kind of moral authority?" Steve stood up, meeting her eye to eye, unflinching. "No, Joy," he said, his voice low and even. "I'm not talking down to anyone. I'm talking up to someone who forgot what respect even looks like." The words hit her like a slap. Joy's face flushed red as she jabbed a finger toward him. "Respect?" she repeated. "You humiliate contestants on your shows for laughs, Steve. You make jokes at people's expense and call it entertainment." Steve leaned forward, his voice turning firm, deep, almost sermon-like. "I make people laugh with me, not at them. I lift them up, give them something to smile about. You, on the other hand, tear people down and call it the view." The audience reacted again, half clapping, half gasping. Joy laughed bitterly, the sound sharp enough to make Whoopi wince. "You talk like a preacher," she said, "but you act like a salesman. Everything's about the brand, the image, the next check." Steve smiled faintly, but there was no humor behind it. "And you talk like a journalist," he said, his tone cutting, "but you act like a bully hiding behind a desk." Joy's eyes narrowed. "At least I don't hide behind a fake grin and a tailor-made suit." Steve's grin disappeared. "No," he said, "you just hide behind your bitterness and call it honesty." Joy stepped closer, the tension between them almost physical now. "You think you're the victim here, don't you? Poor Steve Harvey, misunderstood by the big bad women of television." Steve's voice grew colder. "No, I think I'm the guy who walked into a show expecting a conversation and got an ambush instead." Joy fired back instantly. "You call it an ambush because for once you're not the one holding the microphone." Steve leaned closer, his tone like thunder about to break. "And you call it journalism because it's easier than admitting you're angry at the world." That line landed like a punch. Joy blinked, speechless for half a second, then forced a laugh, but it came out shaky. Joy's eyes glinted as she realized she could push further. She gave a cold, deliberate smile and said, "Then let's talk about your staff, Steve. The ones who say you're impossible to work with." The words hit like a grenade. Steve froze mid-breath, his whole body tensing. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, the confident performer looked caught off guard. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said quietly, but there was danger in his tone. "Oh, I've heard plenty," Joy pressed, leaning forward, voice dripping with satisfaction. "Fear, yelling walkouts. The great Steve Harvey, apparently not so funny when the cameras stop rolling." Steve's face darkened. His voice turned slow, controlled, but every word carried warning. Careful, Joy. You start throwing accusations without proof. That's not journalism. That's defamation. The audience held its breath. Even the sound guys stopped moving. Joy smirked, enjoying the silence she'd created. Defamation? Or just exposing what you try to hide, she said, each word precise, rehearsed, meant to cut. Steve leaned in so close his voice dropped to a growl. You want to expose something? Expose your motives. You didn't come to talk. You came to wound. His tone was pure fire now, the kind that comes from someone holding back an explosion. Joy laughed bitterly, but her voice cracked just enough to betray that she'd hit a nerve, and he'd hit one right back. Truth hurts, doesn't it? She said. Steve looked at her for a long second, his stare steady, his voice quiet but ice cold. Lies hurt more. Joy opened her mouth to fire again, but nothing came out. The words stuck. The tension had stopped being entertainment. It had become personal, almost dangerous. You could feel the line they'd both crossed, and for a second, it wasn't about TV ratings or viral clips anymore. It was about two people who wanted to win and didn't care what it cost to get there. Joy straightened in her chair, trying to pull the upper hand back. Her voice came out sharper than before, cutting through the silence like broken glass. I'm not the villain here, Steve. I'm doing my job. Her tone had that mix of pride and self-defense that told everyone she was starting to feel the heat. Steve didn't even blink. He leaned back, calm but deadly, in the way only someone who's already lost his patience can be. Then you're bad at it, he said, his words slow and deliberate. Because the job is to seek truth, not blood. Joy gave a short, humorless laugh, shaking her head. And your job, she said, is to fake humility while cashing checks off people's insecurities. Her voice dripped with contempt. Steve chuckled under his breath, the kind of low laugh that meant he wasn't amused. He was done. My job, he said firmly, is to make people laugh, to give them hope. Yours seems to be to take it away. The line landed like a punch. The crowd reacted, some clapping, others whispering. The power in the room shifted again, this time toward Steve. Joy leaned forward, eyes blazing. You're not the hero, Steve, she snapped. You're the punchline. It was meant to humiliate him, to pull him back down. But Steve didn't flinch. He gave her a slow, grim smile, one that carried more weight than anger ever could. Then at least I'm still part of the show, he said quietly. The words silenced the studio. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a statement. Joy blinked, caught between anger and disbelief. Steve's voice stayed calm, but there was something final about it, something that said he'd already won the only battle that mattered. Control. Steve took a slow step back from the table, his hands trembling just slightly, not from fear, but from holding in everything he wanted to say. His voice, when it came, was calm and steady, the kind of tone that carries more power than shouting ever could. I came here to talk about connection, not combat, he said, his eyes locked on Joy. But I see which one you prefer. The room went still again. Joy smirked, leaning back in her chair like she'd won. You can't handle questions, Steve. That's on you. Steve shook his head, a faint, exhausted smile on his face. I can handle questions, he said. I just don't answer to cruelty. He reached down, unclipped his microphone, and placed it gently on the table. The sound of the metal hitting the wood echoed louder than any word that had been said that morning. I'm done. That line hit like a gavel. Joy's smirk twitched, but she forced a laugh. Oh, walking away? That's mature. Steve paused halfway to standing and looked her dead in the eye. No, he said quietly. That's peace. Try it sometime. The studio was silent. Every camera stayed locked on him as he turned toward the audience, his voice steady, almost gentle now. Folks, remember, kindness is louder than hate. No one moved. Even Joy sat frozen, her mouth half open, like she wanted to respond but couldn't find the words. Steve gave a small nod to Whoopi, then walked off the stage. His footsteps echoed through the set, each one sounding heavier than the last. When the door closed behind him, the silence was absolute. No applause, no laughter. Just the weight of what had happened, and the unmistakable sense that a line had been crossed that could never be walked back. Joy sat back down slowly, her hands trembling just enough for the cameras to catch it. For the first time all morning, she didn't have a comeback, a quip, or even a smirk. The silence in the studio stretched longer than any producer would ever allow, but no one dared break it. The audience didn't clap. The co-hosts didn't move. The sound of Steve's footsteps leaving the stage was still echoing in everyone's heads. The studio lights suddenly felt harsh, too bright, too honest, exposing every crack in the polished surface of daytime television. Joy blinked hard, trying to steady her breathing, but it didn't help. She'd wanted control, but what she had now was emptiness. The cameras were still rolling, capturing a rare sight, Joy Behar with nothing to say. Somewhere in the stillness, Steve's final words seemed to replay, as if the walls themselves were repeating them back. Kindness is louder than hate. It wasn't just a closing line, it was a verdict. In that war of words, one had walked off with dignity. The other sat beneath the blinding lights, left with nothing but the sound of her own silence. And that's how a simple morning interview turned into one of the most shocking on-air meltdowns in daytime TV history. Steve Harvey walked in to promote a book, and walked out making a statement that no one will forget. If you think Joy went too far, or if you believe Steve did exactly what he had to do, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit subscribe, because we've got even more unbelievable moments from the world of television coming your way. And trust me, you won't want to miss the next one.